Hello, everybody out there in the vinyl community. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Craig. I hope you all are doing well. Well, the other night, I decided to come out, listen to some records. Wasn't sure what I wanted to listen to, so I went and opened my Discogs page and hit random item and stuff, and it picked an album that we're not supposed to talk about, apparently. This one right here, Sergeant Pepper's, right? I'm not going to go into it a whole lot. This is a 2017 repress. It's got some cool stuff in it. It's got these card cutouts. There's like a picture sleeve right here. It's and it's a great album. And we all know this album, you know, over and over. It's been talked about on these vinyl community threads and forever and ever. But the thing is for me about Sergeant Pepper's is whether or not it's a concept album. I don't know if it's a concept album or not. I think it's got a theme, but to me, a concept album is telling a story. And I've always listened to Sergeant Pepper's as an album that has a theme and is kind of telling a story, but I don't know if I would necessarily call it a concept album. Everything out there states that it is somewhat of a concept album. But I think it's great, and a lot of people, some people think it's overrated or whatever, but Day in the Life is one of the greatest songs the Beatles ever did. This is that psychedelic thing. And the thing is with the Beatles for me, it's all before my time. This album originally, I think it was 67 when this album came out. Actually, it was 67. So this is a 2017 repress. That was before I was even alive. So it's always had a societal impact throughout my entire life. I got into the Beatles in the 90s when they were doing all the TV shows and they had all the videos and everything else. And the Beatles One compilation album came out, and that's kind of what drew me into the Beatles. And that's how I became a fan of that. But what happened is the other night I'm listening to this Beatles album and enjoying myself, but that inevitably always leads me to the next album that I'm going to listen to on my list after the Beatles, because to me, it's almost kind of the same type of sound from a band of the same era. And honestly, it's an album that I kind of dig a lot more. And that's this one right here, Rolling Stones, their Satanic Majesties Request. Lenticular cover. See if I can, there it goes. See if I can get it to change for you guys. See how the heads turn and this is a 2018 April 21st record store release. It is very cool. It's got this cool cover, this cool colored splattered vinyl. I actually bought both these records at the same time when I went to record store day that day. That's a hell of a story. Me and my son, 2017, so that would have been, 7 years ago. My kid was 11 at the time. We went to the record store in Ogden, Utah, where we lived at the time. Got in line at like 4 a.m. with a whole bunch of other people, and they served us breakfast and they played music, and it was quite the experience. It was my first record store day experience. That's back when I was just starting to get into collecting records, and I always wanted this Rolling Stones album. I'm sorry, this album here means a lot to me. It's like Sgt. Pepper's, but I think it's a lot more mystical. This also has this really cool inside thing. Apparently, this maze, there's no way to get to the center where it says it's here. If you follow the maze, you can't get there, according to what I was reading on the internet. So for me, this Rolling Stones album, the way the songs like oh hell, songs like Citadel and She's a Rainbow and The Lantern and stuff, all that mysticism that they're talking about really spoke to my soul at the time. um around that era of 2010s and so on. I was going through like some sort of spiritual awakening, and this album really spoke to me on some sort of mystical level. And I used to, I'd have a copy on CD, or we would stream it or whatever. And then when I saw the record store day list, and this was going to be out there, I had to go get this record because this is the main reason I was there. And the fact also at the same time, they were not as a record store day exclusive, but that day in record store day, they had this on the list also. Even though this came out in December of 17, record store day of 18, this is on the list of stuff that they were selling along with this. So I went and picked both of them up that day. That's all I was going there for. I wanted that Beatles album and I wanted their Satanic Majesties request. A lot of people talk about the Satanic Majesties request, even the band, as is kind of a terrible album and they don't know what they were doing. And after that was done, they went right back to their blues rock influence type style. This was very psychedelic. And a lot of people look at it as like, oh, they were just trying to answer to Sergeant Pepper's. There's only like 4 months in between. They were actually recording their Satanic Majesty's request essentially within a month or so at the same time where the Beatles were doing Sergeant Pepper's. So, I don't think the Stones heard Sergeant Pepper's and said, we have to do an album just like that so we can compete with the Beatles. But a lot of people look back on it and say, oh, the Stones were just trying to compete with the Beatles. But they were in the studio pretty much at the same time, both putting out these albums. So this album and this album are both being recorded at the same time. That says something about what was happening in music at the time and how things were changing and becoming more psychedelic. 1967, Summer Love, the spirit of the world and the spirits of world music was changing. And that pop stuff that the Beatles were doing earlier in their career was starting to die off. And if you wanted to continue to be relevant, you had to do something different. And I think the Beatles had a spiritual awakening, and I think the Stones had a spiritual awakening, and they put it in their music and put it out there for us to listen to. These, to me, are both albums of spiritual awakening of the bands. And when you listen to them, you have your own little mini one, essentially. And depending on which one means more to you, um, what speaks to you more spiritually, I think, is the one you think is the better album. I think this is a fucking killer album. I think this album is great. Is it better than this album? I don't know if it's better than this album because this album is considered iconic and socially, this is recognized as one of the greatest albums of all time, where this is kind of like, oh, it's the Stones trying to be Sergeant Pepper's. But spiritually for me, this album, I talk about the spirit of vinyl around here a lot, and this album means a lot to me. The song She's a Rainbow speaks to my soul. The song 2000 Man, of course, I knew, being a Kiss fan, is the Stones telling us what was happening in the future, how they knew or whatever, you know. And basically, the Beatles were hanging out with, a guru from India before they recorded this, and that you can hear that sound in there. The Stones, before they recorded this, were hanging out with Kenneth Anger and studying Aleister Crowley. You can hear that in here. And for me, as you can see over my shoulder there, it's kind of right there up above that thing of Baphomet, that this type of thing would speak to me a lot more than the Rajneesh guru type sound and spirituality. This is more magic and this is more spirituality. That's kind of how I look at these two records. But honestly, they kind of go hand in hand. When Discogs says, hey, we're going to listen to the Beatles and I play this, I have to play this when I'm done. I do. I just have to. I have to have them both. Or if I play this first, this is going to come in second or whatever. I basically listen to both of these records at the same time almost every time I listen to them, almost every single time. It's because they're combined in my brain somehow as kind of the same. They came out in the same year. Of course, they both came out before I was even alive. And then in my mid to late 30s, and I had this little spiritual awakening thing, and music had always been a huge part of my life. When a band like the Stones were speaking to me spiritually, and the same with the Beatles, they kind of formed together, and that's why I kind of play them back to back, or consider them two sides of the same coin, or however you want to look at it. So I know we're not supposed to talk about Sgt. Pepper's because everybody talks about Sgt. Pepper's. I'm not really talking about it musically, I'm talking about it spiritually. So I feel like maybe I can get away with it. I don't know what you guys think, but let me know. A lot of people don't know this record at all. Everybody knows this. You go to a 20-year-old and say, oh, Beatles, Sergeant Pepper's, you know that? They're like, yeah, I've heard that. I know of that. I'm aware of that. If you say the Stones, their Satanic Majesties request, people are like, what? You know? So, but that's kind of what I feel like on these two, you know, that this doesn't get the credit it deserves, honestly. I don't think this gets the credit this deserves. And the Beatles is part of the lexicon of the entire planet, it seems like. You know, they were bigger than Jesus, right? So let me know what you guys think down in the comments or whatever, and you know what you think, especially of this. I mean, we all know what people think of the Beatles album. Uh, it's probably been reviewed 10,000 or 100,000 times. I don't think this one gets talked about a whole lot, and I'm not doing a deep dive on it. I just wanted to talk about what these two records mean to me spiritually and what happened Friday night. You know, one led to the other, and then that turned into something else, and I could have kept going, but I just decided to talk about these two because of their iconic and what they mean to me. When I listen to their Satanic Majesty's Request or Sergeant Pepper's, I feel like I'm having some sort of religious experience almost, rather than just like listening to music. So I don't know if you guys all have, I feel like we all kind of have that feeling when it comes to music. We have those records that speak to us almost as a religious experience. And that's what these two records do for me. And the Stones more so than the Beatles because religion and spirituality is personal and it kind of speaks closer to me, you know. Songs about, you know, let sing all this all together and see what happens. And you know, I don't know, I feel like this one has more depth. You know, Sergeant Pepper's, great album, great songs, you know, cool concept. They're both concept albums to an extent. Basically it's their mood or whatever. They're not really telling a story from start to finish, but they're having like this concept of this style of music, and the mood of it is sort of a concept on its own, rather than like a concept record like The Wall or something like that, which tells a story from start to finish. So that's kind of what I feel about these two. That's what those two mean to me. Let me know what they mean to you. I really appreciate all you guys out there watching, and I will talk to you all at a later date.